Dr. Maya Rodriguez stood at her workstation in the Joint Species Research Facility, keenly aware of the crystalline beings observing her from their elevated platforms. The Centaurians, with their translucent bodies that refracted light like living prisms, had been studying humans for the past 3 years. Their fascination with what they considered humanity's primitive biology was matched only by their thinly veiled condescension. Maya checked the atmospheric readings for the 1,000th time that day. The Centaurians required a precisely controlled environment of crystalline particulates suspended in the air, a fact they never failed to mention when discussing the simplicity of human respiratory needs. As the facility's lead xenobiologist, she'd learned to bite her tongue at such remarks. The mission of fostering interspecies understanding was too important for personal pride. Dr. Rodriguez, a harmonic voice chimed from above. Your cellular degradation rate appears 3.2% higher than baseline today. Are your species' repair mechanisms functioning adequately? Maya recognized the voice as belonging to Zyxtal, the Centaurian chief researcher. His crystalline form shifted through shades of blue and violet, their equivalent of speaking with raised eyebrows. I'm fine, Zyxtal, she replied, suppressing a sigh. Humans often show slight variations in biological markers. It's part of our adaptability. She'd long since given up explaining that what they saw as system failures were often simply normal human fluctuations. The facility hummed around them, a marvel of engineering designed to accommodate both species. Separated by quantum-charged barriers, humans and Centaurians could work in their respective atmospheric conditions while maintaining visual and audio contact. The barriers shimmered like soap bubbles, delineating the spaces where two civilizations met but couldn't quite touch. Maya's attention was drawn to a smaller Centaurian floating near Zyxtal, his offspring, Lyrx. Unlike the adult's rigid crystalline structures, younger Centaurians possessed a more fluid form, their bodies rippling with iridescent patterns. Maya had always found them fascinating, reminding her of the auroras back on Earth. A sudden tremor ran through the facility, causing the quantum barriers to flicker. Maya's instruments erupted in a cascade of warnings. The experimental reactor that powered the facility's atmospheric processors was showing dangerous power fluctuations. Primary containment field is destabilizing, the facility's AI announced, its voice eerily calm. Secondary systems engaging. All personnel proceed to designated safety zones. Maya watched as the Centaurians began their emergency protocols, their bodies pulsing with alarmed patterns of red and orange. But something was wrong. The quantum barriers weren't just flickering now, they were beginning to fail. The particle suspension in our atmosphere is becoming unstable, Zyxtal announced, his harmonic voice carrying an unfamiliar note of concern. Without proper crystalline saturation, our bodies will begin to lose cohesion. Maya's mind raced through the implications. The Centaurians needed their specialized atmosphere like humans needed oxygen. If the atmospheric processors failed completely, she pushed the thought aside and focused on solutions. We need to reroute power from the auxiliary systems, she called out, her fingers flying over her console. If we can stabilize the quantum barriers, we might be able to maintain atmospheric separation long enough for the reactor to reset. Your suggestion is noted, Dr. Rodriguez, Zyxtal responded, his tone carrying that familiar note of dismissal. But surely you understand that our engineers are better equipped to handle such delicate adjustments. Another violent tremor shook the facility. Warning klaxons blared as the reactor's containment field began to collapse. Maya watched in horror as cracks appeared in the quantum barriers, creating dangerous zones where the two atmospheres began to mix. All personnel, evacuate immediately, the AI's voice commanded. Reactor breach imminent. This is not a drill. As chaos erupted around them, Maya caught sight of Lyrx, separated from the other Centaurians by a failing section of the barrier. The young alien's crystalline form was already showing signs of stress, edges beginning to blur as the atmospheric mixture threatened their cohesion. In that moment, Maya realized that all their careful studies of each other's differences meant nothing. What mattered was what they shared, the universal instinct to protect the vulnerable. As she grabbed her emergency gear, she knew the next few minutes would either bridge the gap between their species or destroy years of careful diplomacy. The facility's lights flickered ominously, casting strange shadows through the crystalline forms of the panicking Centaurians. Maya took a deep breath, checking the seals on her protective suit. Whatever happened next would redefine the relationship between humans and Centaurians forever, assuming any of them survived the next hour. The reactor's warning sirens pierced the air as emergency containment protocols initiated throughout the facility. Maya watched the chaos unfold through the deteriorating quantum barriers, her heart pounding as she saw Centaurian forms rushing toward their evacuation points. Their crystalline bodies flickered with patterns of distress, rapid pulses of red and orange that made them look like living emergency lights. Atmospheric contamination reaching critical levels in sections C through F, the AI announced. Crystalline saturation dropping below sustainable thresholds. Through the chaos, Maya noticed Zwextal's frantic movements. The chief researcher's usually pristine crystalline form was showing signs of stress, edges becoming cloudy as the atmospheric balance deteriorated. But it wasn't his own safety causing his distress. His harmonic voice rang out in frequencies Maya had never heard before. LYRX. Has anyone seen LYRX? The young Centaurian had disappeared from view during the initial evacuation. Maya's blood ran cold as she realized where the child must be. There was only one section of the facility that hadn't reported evacuation status, the reactor's primary control room. Life signs detected in Section A7, the AI confirmed Maya's fears. Single Centaurian signature, juvenile pattern. Zwextal's form pulsed with what Maya now recognized as pure terror. Section A7 was already showing critical atmospheric degradation. For a young Centaurian, whose crystalline structure wasn't fully stabilized, exposure to an uncontrolled atmosphere could be fatal. Our rescue teams cannot reach that section, another Centaurian researcher announced, their voice carrying harmonics of defeat. The atmospheric degradation would cause immediate crystalline collapse. We must accept that dash. No. Zwextal's interruption came with a burst of deep crimson light. There must be a way. Our technology is superior. Our understanding of quantum mechanics is unmatched. We cannot simply dash. Maya was already moving. She checked the seals on her protective suit one final time as she pulled up the facility's schematics on her tablet. The suit wasn't rated for the extreme conditions near the reactor core, but it would have to do. Dr. Rodriguez, what are you doing? Zwextal's voice carried a new note, uncertainty. Your atmospheric requirements make it impossible for Centaurians to attempt a rescue, Maya replied, programming a route into her tablet. But humans, we're not so limited. Our primitive biology might just be an advantage for once. The radiation levels in Section A7 are beyond safe parameters for human exposure, one of the Centaurian scientists objected. Your cellular structure would begin to break down within minutes. Maya allowed herself a grim smile. That's why I need to be quick, isn't it? She could see the conflict in Zwextal's shifting colors, pride warring with desperation. For 3 years, the Centaurians had studied humans as fascinating but inferior specimens. Now they were faced with the reality that their technological superiority meant nothing in this situation. Only a human could survive long enough in the degraded atmosphere to reach LYRX. The quantum barriers are failing in Section B3, the AI warned. Total atmospheric mixing imminent. I can reach LYRX through the maintenance tunnels, Maya said, already moving toward the access hatch. They're shielded against radiation and should still have atmospheric integrity. Dr. Rodriguez, Zwextal's voice stopped her. His crystalline form had shifted to a deep blue, a color she'd never seen him display before. Our studies suggest humans possess a strong survival instinct that should prevent such reckless behavior. Why would you risk your life for a member of another species? Maya paused at the hatch, thinking of all the times she'd had to listen to their clinical observations about human limitations. Maybe you should add this to your research notes, Zwaxtal. Humans don't just survive, we protect. Even those who think we're primitive. With that, she sealed her helmet and pulled open the hatch. The maintenance tunnel stretched before her, emergency lights casting red shadows along its length. Somewhere in the facility, a young Centaurian was trapped and terrified. Maya had about 15 minutes before radiation exposure would reach critical levels for her primitive human body. She took a deep breath and began to crawl through the tunnel. Behind her, she could hear the Centaurians' harmonic voices rising in what might have been concern or prayer. Either way, she had a job to do. It was time to show them exactly what human determination looked like in a crisis. The maintenance tunnel echoed with Maya's controlled breathing as she crawled through the narrow space. Her suit's sensors were already registering increasing radiation levels, and the temperature climbed with every meter she advanced toward the reactor section. 10 minutes until critical radiation exposure, her suit's AI warned, its voice eerily calm in her helmet. The tunnel took a sharp turn, and Maya could feel the heat even through her protective gear. The reactor's failing containment field was turning this section of the facility into an inferno. Her suit's cooling system worked overtime, but it wasn't designed for these conditions. Dr. Rodriguez, Zwaxtal's voice crackled through her comm, our sensors indicate the atmospheric degradation in Section A7 is accelerating. LYRX's crystalline matrix is showing signs of destabilization. Maya pushed herself to move faster. How long? At current degradation rates, 12 minutes before irreversible structural collapse begins. A bitter laugh escaped her lips. Well, that works out perfectly. Either the radiation gets me, or we both make it out. She paused at a junction, checking her tablet's map. How are the evacuation efforts going? All other personnel have reached safety bunkers, another Centaurian voice reported. The facility's automated systems are attempting to stabilize the reactor, but success probability is below 20%. Maya reached a vertical shaft and began climbing. Her muscles burned with the effort, and sweat was already soaking through her suit's inner layer. The radiation warning indicators were shifting from yellow to orange, counting down her remaining safe exposure time. 7 minutes until critical exposure, the suit reminded her. She finally reached the access panel to Section A7. Through the reinforced viewport, she could see the horror of what lay beyond. The air itself seemed to shimmer with heat and radiation, and sparks of energy crackled where the quantum barriers had completely failed. And there, huddled in a corner near a defunct control panel, was LYRX. The young Centaurian's crystalline form was noticeably cloudy, the usual sharp edges beginning to blur. Their color had faded to a sickly pale blue, with occasional sparks of frightened orange pulsing through their matrix. Maya took a deep breath and sealed her helmet's secondary containment layer. I found LYRX. I'm going in. Dr. Rodriguez, Zwaxtal's voice carried an unfamiliar tremor. Our simulations indicate human survival probability in those conditions is dash. Save the statistics, Maya interrupted. Just tell me what I need to know to help LYRX. A moment of silence followed, then Zwaxtal spoke again, his tone transformed from scientific detachment to desperate parent. Young Centaurians can't maintain their crystalline structure without proper atmospheric support. You'll need to hold LYRX together. Physically contain the matrix until you reach a stable environment. Maya pulled off her outer utility belt and began fashioning it into a makeshift harness. Like holding water without a cup. Got it. She unlocked the access panel, and immediately the heat hit her like a physical blow. Warning indicators screamed across her helmet display as she pushed into the room. The air was thick with radiation and failing quantum field energy, making every step feel like wading through molasses. LYRX, she called out, trying to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. I'm here to help you. Do you understand me? The young Centaurian's form pulsed weakly with recognition. Maya could see their structure was becoming increasingly unstable, edges beginning to dissolve like sugar in hot water. 5 minutes until critical exposure. Maya reached LYRX and knelt beside them. Up close, she could see the terrifying extent of their deterioration. The once beautiful crystalline form was now more like melting ice, threatening to lose cohesion entirely. "I need you to trust me," she said softly, reaching out with trembling hands. "This may feel strange, but I'm going to help you hold together until we reach your parent." As her gloved hands made contact with LYRX's surface, she felt a bizarre tingling sensation even through her suit. The young Centaurian's form was simultaneously solid and fluid, like touching living mercury. Maya carefully began wrapping her makeshift harness around them, trying to provide physical containment for their failing structure. Dr. Rodriguez, Zwexdal's voice was barely a whisper. "LYRX's readings, they're stabilizing." Maya secured the last strap of the harness. "Something about human body heat," she gasped, the radiation beginning to make her dizzy. "Helping maintain matrix cohesion. Going to try, getting us out now." She lifted LYRX, cradling their partially fluid form against her chest. The young Centaurian's color shifted slightly toward a warmer blue, trust, or perhaps hope. 3 minutes until critical exposure. Maya turned toward the access shaft, her vision already beginning to blur at the edges. The reactor's containment field chose that moment to fail another level, sending a wave of scorching air through the room. She stumbled but kept her grip on LYRX firm. "Ready or not," she muttered through gritted teeth, "time to show these crystalline critics what human determination really looks like." The path back would be twice as challenging, carrying precious cargo through failing systems and rising radiation. But Maya had come too far to fail now. With each step toward the access shaft, she rewrote everything the Centaurians thought they knew about human limitations. The journey back through the maintenance shaft was a nightmare of screaming alarms and failing systems. Maya's arms trembled with the effort of climbing one-handed while keeping LYRX secured against her chest. The young Centaurian's form pulsed weakly with waves of frightened color, but their structure was holding together within the makeshift harness. 2 minutes until critical exposure, her suit warned. Cellular damage detected. Medical attention required. Maya could feel it. Each breath burned in her lungs, and her muscles screamed in protest. The radiation was taking its toll, but she couldn't afford to think about that now. She had to focus on each movement, each careful step toward safety. Dr. Rodriguez, Zwexdal's voice crackled through static. "The reactor's containment field is cascading toward total failure. The maintenance shaft's structural integrity is compromised." As if to emphasize his warning, a violent tremor shook the facility. Maya lost her footing on the ladder and slammed against the shaft wall, barely maintaining her grip. LYRX let out a harmonic cry of fear, their form briefly destabilizing before Maya's body heat helped them reform. "We need another route," she gasped, checking her tablet with shaking hands. The main evacuation corridors were already gone, consumed by radiation and heat. "The coolant tunnels. If we can reach them." "Impossible," one of the Centaurian scientists cut in. "The coolant tunnels are flooded with cryogenic material. The temperature differential would cause immediate crystalline shatter in LYRX's weakened state." Maya started moving again, forcing her radiation-weakened muscles to cooperate. "What about my body heat? It's helping stabilize them now. If I can keep them close enough." A moment of silence filled the comm channel as the Centaurians processed her suggestion. Maya could imagine their crystalline forms shifting with calculations and probability assessments. 1 minute until critical exposure. "The human's theory has merit," another Centaurian voice announced. "Their inefficient biological processes generate significant thermal energy. If Dr. Rodriguez can maintain direct contact, her body heat might create a sufficient buffer zone." Another explosion rocked the facility, closer this time. Maya could hear metal groaning as structural supports began to fail. "We're out of options," she snapped, already changing direction toward the coolant access point. "Zewextal, I need you to trust me. Not as a research subject, not as a primitive species, as someone trying to save your child." The comm crackled with interference before Zewextal's response came through. "The access code is 847 Alpha, Crystal, 9. Please, bring them home." Maya reached the coolant tunnel access panel and punched in the code with trembling fingers. The panel slid open, releasing a blast of supercooled air that frosted her helmet instantly. Warning indicators flashed across her display as her suit's temperature regulation system struggled to compensate. 30 seconds until critical exposure. She pulled LYRX closer, wrapping both arms around their semi-fluid form. "Hold on tight, little one. This is going to be cold." Maya stepped into the coolant tunnel. The temperature drop was immediate and brutal, cutting through her suit's protection like knives of ice. She could feel LYRX trembling against her, their crystalline matrix fighting against the urge to shatter in the extreme cold. "Keep moving," she whispered, as much to herself as to LYRX. "Focus on my heat. Stay with me." Each step was agony. The cold tried to freeze her joints, while radiation sickness made the world spin around her. But she could feel LYRX drawing warmth from her body, their form gradually stabilizing as they found a balance between her heat and the tunnel's cold. Critical radiation exposure imminent. Immediate evacuation required. The tunnel seemed endless, a frozen hell of frost and pain. Maya's vision began to darken at the edges, but she forced herself to keep moving. One step. Another. Each one bringing them closer to safety, or to failure. Then she heard it, harmonic voices ahead, growing clearer. The evacuation point. They were almost there. "I can see them," a Centaurian voice called out. "They've made it to the final stretch." Maya stumbled forward, her legs finally giving out just as hands, both human and crystalline, reached out to catch her. As consciousness began to fade, she maintained her grip on LYRX, refusing to let go until she felt Zewextal's familiar crystalline touch taking his child from her arms. The last thing she saw before darkness took her was LYRX's form blazing with colors she'd never seen before, a rainbow of emotion that needed no scientific translation. In that moment, as human medical teams rushed to treat her radiation exposure, Maya realized she'd done more than save a life. She'd shattered something far more rigid than crystalline structures, the barrier of prejudice between their species. Maya awoke in the medical bay of the Earth Embassy 3 days later, her body still fighting the effects of radiation exposure. Through the quantum-treated windows, she could see the crystalline spires of the Centaurian city rising like frozen fountains against the alien sky. The medical equipment around her beeped steadily, monitoring her recovery. "Your cellular regeneration rate exceeds our initial projections," a familiar harmonic voice observed. "Once again, human biology defies our statistical models." Maya turned her head to see Zewextal hovering near her bed, his crystalline form shifting through subtle shades of blue and green. But something was different about his presence, gone was the clinical detachment she'd grown used to over the years. "How's LYRX?" she asked, her voice rough from disuse. Zewextal's form brightened noticeably. "Fully recovered. Their matrix has stabilized completely, though they now display some unusual characteristics. Our scientists are still studying the effects of prolonged exposure to human thermal patterns." Maya tried to sit up, but her muscles protested. "Let me guess, you've already written 3 research papers about it." 7, actually." A pulse of what might have been embarrassment passed through Zewextal's form. "Though their focus has shifted considerably from our previous work. We're no longer studying human limitations, but rather, human possibilities." He moved closer to her bed, his crystalline surface refracting the room's light in complex patterns. The Centaurian Science Council has reviewed the incident extensively. Your actions have challenged many of our fundamental assumptions about your species. You mean you've finally realized that being different doesn't mean being inferior? Maya managed a weak smile. We've realized something far more significant. Zwexdal's form shifted to a deep, resonant purple, a color she'd never seen him display before. In our pursuit of understanding your species, we became so focused on documenting your biological constraints that we failed to observe your most remarkable characteristic, your ability to transcend those very limitations. A soft chiming sound drew their attention to the door. LYRX floated in, their young form now displaying a fascinating new pattern, swirls of color that seemed to pulse in rhythm with Maya's heart monitor. They moved directly to her bedside, touching her hand with a crystalline appendage that felt warmer than any Centaurian she'd encountered before. They insisted on visiting you every day, Zwexdal explained. Our xenobiologists believe they've developed a form of empathic resonance with you, a connection we previously thought impossible between our species. Maya watched in amazement as LYRX's colors shifted to match her emotional state, a bridge between their different ways of expressing feeling. So much for your theory about humans lacking subtle communication methods. Indeed.